I have a confession to make. I'm a huge fan of Ascended Astarion. Hello guys, thanks for joining me today. I'm really glad to see you on my channel. My name's Kate, and yes, I've been making those first-person POVs with Astarion all these months, and you've been watching them so well. You've been such a great audience. I'm really grateful for your support. And today we're going to talk about a complicated topic regarding Astarion and his fans. Specifically, I will try to convince you why Ascended Astarion is not as bad as he seems, and why he deserves fan love, and why his fans deserve respect towards themselves. So let's get started. First off, let's talk about Astarion in case someone doesn't know who he is. Astarion is one of the main companion characters we meet at the very beginning of the game. He's a high elf, and high elves in D&D have quite interesting traits. They are racist, arrogant, and have a sense of superiority. These traits are also present in Astarion. Plus, his class is rogue, and rogues are very tricky. I think it says a lot about Astarion's personality, however, let's dive into further details.
Here's my little treat, with their cheeks all flushed.
Astarion's character is quite alarming. He behaves playfully, has interesting manners, approves of sadism and torture, says he likes killing, sometimes even innocent creatures. He has those racist tendencies, especially towards gnomes and shorter races, as I've said before. Talking about his psychological profile, I'll just say one thing. At first, he manipulates you, violates your personal space, and looks kinda sociopathic. His appearance is very attractive, he's seductive, sweet-talking, and he's the perfect depiction of a bad guy trope who made hundreds of thousands of people fall for him all over the world.
Killed feels like a strong word. Not many corpses have your vigor.
For the last 200 years, Astarion has been a spawn of a vampire lord named Cazador who lives in Baldur's Gate. Astarion doesn't talk much about his past, he only mentions that he worked as a city magistrate until he made a ruling that made Gur people angry. For that, Gur people attacked him, almost killed him, but Cazador came, saved him and offered Astarion eternal life, which he agreed to but later regretted.
It was only afterwards I realized just how long eternity could be.
Astarion, like all other companions, is available for a romantic relationship. If we help him and do things he approves of, he tells more about himself and even falls in love with us at the end of Act 2, after which we find out that Astarion's existence during the last 200 years was miserable because he was tortured and forced to do various vile things at his master's command. He used to seduce and bring a very big number of victims to Cazador's palace. That activity damaged Astarion's mental health and traumatized him. I'm gonna talk about his trauma later because it's a very interesting topic.
The entire reason for my existence was to seduce anything with a pulse. And every instinct I have tells me that nothing's changed. I'm still just a means to an end.
Cazador needed such a big number of victims, if to be precise 7,000 souls, because he made a deal with the devil Mephistopheles to transform from a true vampire into an ascended, living vampire with the perks of a living being. I should mention that the Ascension ritual is Larian's own invention. Such a ritual doesn't exist in D&D lore. However, Astarion finds out that he's one of these victims for the ritual. He understands that after we help him read the runic scars carved into his back, which represent a part of that devil's contract. Then Astarion decides to try ascending himself instead of his master and gain the very power over others that he has always dreamed of, to rid himself of the burdens of vampirism and have the ability to stand up for himself. This is his biggest desire in life. He mentions it repeatedly in the game and asks us for help in achieving this goal.
And I need you to help me.
When we face Cazador together and defeat him in a rather difficult battle in Act 3, we are faced with an ambiguous choice. On one hand, we can dissuade Astarion from ascending. This path is considered to be a good path because the morality of D&D 5e states that power and might corrupt and lead to loneliness, that selfish actions are evil. In this case, Astarion simply kills his creator. The scene is very heartbreaking and leaves no one indifferent. The player can influence Astarion's decision regarding the 7,000 spawn that Cazador prepared for the ritual as well. They can be released at our own risk or dealt with, as they might be difficult to control. Later in my video essay, I will refer to the non-ascended Astarion as Spawn Astarion.
I think we're done here. Let's go.
And the second option is to allow Astarion to ascend, to conduct the Black Mass, sacrifice all those souls and take everything Cazador worked for all these years. After this, he becomes, as he says, free. He no longer fears anyone or anything. He can walk in the sun, eat regular human food, his heart starts beating and he gains new abilities.
Oh, it feels delicious!
Because of the outcome of Astarion's personal quest in Act 3, his fans separated into two groups. There is one big group of fans who prefer his good version and don't let him ascend, and a smaller group which prefers ascended Astarion. Of course, there are also people who choose Ascended or Spawn Astarion depending on their playthrough. However, a couple of months ago, I've made a poll asking people which Astarion is their favorite and got very interesting results. It turns out that 78% of people prefer Spawn Astarion and only 7% choose to ascend him. Later, I made a poll where I asked what do people think about Ascended Astarion, and 46% just blindly hate him. Since there are more fans of Spawn Astarion, their opinion is overwhelming, and sometimes they tend to say very unpleasant things online about Ascended Astarion and his fans. Most often they call Ascended Astarion an abusive tyrant who becomes just like his master and call him Cazador 2.0. Sometimes they call Ascended Astarion fans delusional and accuse them of choosing abusive partners in real life because of their in-game decisions, which sounds super ridiculous to me, but that's the way it is, you guys. Out of curiosity, I decided to make a poll on my YouTube channel and asked people if they've ever finished the game being in a romantic relationship with Ascended Astarion, and got astonishing results. 76% of people have never seen Ascended Astarion romance until the end of the game. Of course, there were people who said that it's clear what kind of personality he becomes from the videos on YouTube, but let me assure you, as a content creator, I know what I'm talking about. You cannot see the whole picture of Ascended Astarion by only watching videos on YouTube, because the most popular videos are either his negative reactions to toxic comments from your main character or just super ambiguous love confessions, I don't know, or something. That's why I'm convinced that most people writing all those hateful comments simply don't understand what they're talking about. All these comments look exactly the same. People just repeat something they've read or heard from others before without any critical thinking. But don't worry, in this video I'm gonna discuss every aspect of Ascended Astarion, so it was easier for you to understand what kind of character he is. I lay out what judgments are just people's made-up headcanon and what what the game actually shows us. And no need to accuse me of no media literacy, because this is just a game. Astarion is made of pixels, he is not real. There is no need to imagine him in real life, since his only purpose is to entertain the player. In February this year, Larian released patch 6 with new kissing animations as a present for Valentine's Day, and those new Ascended Astarion kissing animations made his fans super unhappy. So the main thing that made people disappointed is not the animations themselves, because, well, they are kind of fun and entertaining, especially as a part of roleplay with the possessive vampire lord. Here, everyone is confused by scared facial expressions of the main character. I have my Dirge right here, who is a child of the god of murder, but as soon as she asks Astarion to kiss her, she suddenly becomes afraid of him, which doesn't make any sense. Anyway, I'll talk about it in details later. I don't understand why Larian did this. I tend to think that maybe it was some kind of hype or trolling, or did Larian really listen to those Spawn fans who say that Ascended Astarion abuses our main character behind the scene? I don't know. However, it looks very unprofessional because it made so many people unhappy. It gave Spawn Astarion fans more reasons to shame Ascended Astarion fans, which makes me super sad, because I don't understand why we cannot just enjoy this piece of art without a fear of being labeled delusional by people on the internet. These new kissing animations worsened the situation in the fandom and made Ascended Astarion fans to want to separate from the main fandom. They started creating closed safe spaces where they wouldn't have to encounter those toxic comments online. Anyway, being involved in this mess on the internet all these months, I've decided to speak up about this problem. I thought if I have the biggest Astarion dedicated YouTube channel, maybe I will be able to convince people to be kinder to each other. However, I kinda doubt that, because I'm sure I'm gonna get a lot of hate comments for this video. If I were worried about critical comments, I wouldn't be posting this video in the first place. So, in this video, I'm going to talk about why Ascended Astarion deserves fan love and his fans deserve respect, why he has a right to exist, and loving him is not as bad as people say on the internet. Let's move on to the next part. Yes, you heard me right. I'm seriously convinced that most players misunderstand such a conflicted character as Astarion. Let's start with his backstory. You might argue that the initial backstory, which was created by developers, is no longer canon because it was removed from the release version of the game and is not mentioned anywhere anymore. However, I think it's important to look at it to understand Astarion better. Many people in my comments have said that Astarion in his life before becoming a vampire spawn was a hedonist, a lover of pleasures, generally quite a corrupt noble with a nasty character. It turns out it didn't come out of nowhere. In an article on Vice website from 2020, where the first impressions of the demo version of the game were described, the author mentioned the originally planned backstory for Astarion. In this case, we were shown Astarion, who seemed like a real asshole, a disgraced nobleman who used his position as a local magistrate to serve a vampire clan by feeding them prisoners. He was eventually too corrupt even for them and was effectively sent to serve as the personal slave of a powerful vampire. Astarion has the affected sophistication of a true decadent. The YouTube channel Rock Paper Shotgun was also lucky enough to see an extended 3-hour demo version of the game.
Even Astarion is way more sinister than I first thought. Vampires made him their spawn after catching him selling criminals into slavery when he was a magister. His punishment has lasted hundreds of years, and Sven cryptically refers to something written on his back that when you finally see it, you'll be, and I quote, "Oh,
By the way, I have already mentioned that Astarion was saved from death by Cazador, and it's a very interesting coincidence, don't you think? Next, we can refer to the release Artbook, which is still physically sold with the deluxe edition of the game, and it says... Decadent and dangerous. 200 years ago, Astarion was a corrupt elite of Baldur's Gate with a taste for power and a hunger for eternal life. It wasn't long before these desires became a nightmarish reality. His leather armor still boasts the fine golden embroidery of high society, an aesthetic inspired by 18th century libertines and European rock stars of the early 90s, two subcultures that echo Astarion's desire to live a life without restraint. Overall, I think it's a pity that Astarion's initial backstory was removed from the game, because now people tend to call him a marshmallow, a softie. This is very strange because Astarion approves of genocide of the Grove, of killing the Gur Hunter, and other objectively evil deeds almost all the time during the game. And actually there is a reason why people don't usually pay attention to the corrupt side of Astarion's personality, which is barely visible under that clownish and flamboyant behavior. Developers just wanted to make him entertaining, so playing with him in your party was pleasant and fun. And I think that's one of the reasons why some of the harshest dialogues from early access were either softened or removed. Of course, maybe it was a technical decision to make the content of the first act more compact, because some of those dialogues were remade into PAD format and now can be heard as small comments or reactions from companions in the release version of the game. For example,
I haven't spent much time with helpless old ladies. Was that normal? That sly old crone. At least we got to kill someone, I suppose. We probably gave those two idiots an easier death than whatever she had planned for them. I haven't spent much time with helpless old ladies. Was that normal? Well, what did you make of that? You know, some call the moment of climax a little death. Our friends here just experienced the bigger version. Oh, I've seen worse. Gnomes can be... Oh, I've seen worse. Gnomes can be... Sorry bones guarding dusty trinkets. Pathetic. They're unthinking cadavers. I may as well feel sorry for a breadbasket. Well, that was pathetic. Sorry bones guarding dusty old trinkets. They're unthinking cadavers. I may as well feel sorry for a breadbasket. I didn't take these refugees for killers. Maybe I've misjudged them. They're still going to die, but at least they're willing to fight. Oh, sweetie, you can't murder vermin. The goblin was just put out of our misery. That's all.
All's well with the world, one might argue. And yet, there's something unsettling about witnessing an execution, no?
Hardly a winning display of archery, but it did the job.
The goblin was just put out of our misery. That's all. Raising the dead is easier than capturing slaves. The drow in Menzoberranzan could learn something. They're just husks. I couldn't care less if they're slaves or building material. Maybe it would be different if they were still thinking creatures. Then again, maybe not. Oh, absolutely. But as abominations go, at least this one's useful. Raising the dead is easier than capturing slaves. The drow in Menzoberranzan could learn something. They're just husks. I couldn't care less if they're slaves or building material.
As you can see, there was much more to those casual comments from Astarion before release. Those little dialogues in early access gave us a better idea of his dark and sinister backstory. Astarion is super violent and corrupt himself. He doesn't care if someone dies or suffers. However, not seeing his dark side and not knowing the fact that he probably used to sell criminals to vampires as a corrupt magistrate, we now can sympathize with him. We just think, oh, what a fun guy. He's a bit weird, but he's super cute and sexy. But he also suffered from his master. What a poor traumatized kitty. I want to help him and show him that the world is not as bad as he thinks.
Spite made me who I am. Now, let sleeping dogs lie, lest you get bitten.
However, that corruption is still present in Astarion, and his writer Stephen Rooney in his Idle Insights interview explains why Astarion behaves like that.
When you meet Astarion, the first thing that he does in the game is pull a knife on you. So he has a certain appreciation for violence, I guess, a bit of a murdery streak. He's a vampire. He's all about blood, and he's all about darker sides of humanity. So it's important that that's represented in the game. But at the same time, he is really fun. He's really fun to write. He's really fun to have in your party. It's very important for me that is also represented. Those are kind of the two sides. He's gonna stab you, but will have a smile on his face as he does it. I mean, I don't know. That's kind of him in a nutshell.
And you might apologize for it afterwards, depending on how the conversation goes.
Yeah, maybe. If at any point I had put a super cliche vampire into the game, it would have been shot down just. That is not how Larian rolls. The main thing with Astarion's character, I think, was just trying to get a sense of fun into him. It would be very, very easy to write a character that was very unlikable in Astarion. And we absolutely didn't want to do that. He's a bit terrible consistently throughout the game. He's awful in a whole lot of ways. But at the same time, he needs to be charming, and he needs to be someone that you actually want to have around, because you're going to be with this guy for hours and hours. It's a long trek through this game, so you've got to make sure he's engaging, you've got to make sure he's fun.
Which made us completely forget about the fact that he's really dangerous, especially as a romantic interest, since you objectively cannot build a proper relationship with such a traumatized person, who in addition is a vampire fine with killing and making a complete mess just for fun. In the first act, he's hiding all those wretched tendencies of his character behind playful manners and theatrics. But when he stops showing off like that after Ascension, so many people suddenly get scared and have no shame insulting him or his fans who chose him for his evil sides in the first place. I think those are very interesting delusions and double standards right here. The particularly active Spawn Astarion fans in discussions about Ascended Astarion often say that they worry about the mental health of his fans. Plus, they call us delusional and that we tend to choose such abusive partners in real life because of our fantasies. The most interesting part of all this is that many of them usually prefer to do good deeds in the game, and in their attempts to romance Astarion in their first playthrough, very often receive his famous rejection at the Tiefling party due to his low approval.
And not with you, just to be clear. I mean, can you imagine? Ugh, no.
I'm also among them because I was taught by the plot-driven games where you're guided along the good path. When I first played Baldur's Gate, I tried to help everyone, I trusted everyone, but got very unpleasant results after that because Baldur's Gate is very different from all other games and so many things are not what they seem, and I'm very thankful to Larian for such a great experience. I also got that famous refusal from Astarion at the Tiefling party, and I even had to Google how to make Astarion's approval higher to make him love me. And while searching for answers, I even came across the videos which were called like, you can be good and still romance Astarion. What does it say? Of course, I assume there are people who just want to play a good path. However, it seems that most of them just misunderstand Astarion, because under the funny videos I made about him, about his refusal, I've got comments like, oh, in my first playthrough I got rejected by him and I was so disappointed that I had to stop playing the game and so on. Looking at these comments and the survey I've shown earlier, we can see that most people tend to perceive Astarion one-sidedly. They don't explore the balance of dark and fun which his writer Stephen Rooney wanted to represent in him. You know, it sounds very interesting to me because these people want to be good in their playthrough, however they are willing to engage with a deliberately dangerous man because he's just very attractive, playful, and makes them feel desired. And they are willing to endure his bad behavior and bad approvals in hopes that he will change. To me, it seems like that very victim mentality which is called I can fix him, and there are so many jokes about Astarion where people say I can fix him or about how much red flagged he is. I hope people understand that fixing someone in real life is much more difficult. When you interact with a traumatized person, you will not have only like 4 or 5 options in your dialogues with him. You will have to deal with much more serious problems like paranoia or very weird behavior which you wouldn't understand. Nevertheless, these beliefs in his good nature sometimes raise many questions for me because one girl on YouTube made a video why women like Astarion, and after watching it I realized that she is very right about one thing. We're all delusional, sisters. Interestingly, in the video Why Women Like Astarion, he is perceived as safe because he is feminine and mannered and doesn't show signs of toxic masculinity, generally being a pixel man who is simply unable to harm you like real men. In this, she's probably right, but actually if you transfer his behavior to real life and soberly look at the situation, it turns out that he is the only one of all the companions who attacks you from the start and violates your personal space several times. He is the most unsafe member of the party. In the first act, he doesn't even care if he harms you. Even Lae'zel doesn't want to harm you as much as Astarion does. Let's take a closer look at a very interesting dialogue where Astarion asks how you'd prefer him to kill you. Here he shows his actual evil character very well.
First sign of change, and I'll have to stop that pretty little heart of yours. I am open to suggestions. Knives, poison, strangulation, whatever you'd prefer.
If you say you'd prefer not to die, he tells how he enjoyed watching homeless people die on the streets.
Well, now you're just being closed-minded. There are some lovely ways to go. I've watched urchins freeze to death in the street. It looks peaceful, just like falling asleep.
If you choose poison, he starts imagining how you'd suffer if it doesn't work well.
A fine choice. I can think of some nightshades that are deliciously fatal. If they're mixed well, you'll just close your eyes and drift away. And if they're not, well, I'm getting ahead of myself. This is all a worst-case scenario.
Then there is a dialogue where he asks to give him a tadpole. He was waiting until someone else consumes it to see if it doesn't cause any harm before taking it himself, and if we refuse to share, he threatens us.
Do consider sharing next time. Because if you continue to get between me and what I want, I will have to find a way through you. Just something to think about.
And another one where he says he wouldn't take the poison himself but would be entertained to watch how you die from it.
Pretty bottle. But I wouldn't take wyvern poison even if we do begin to turn. If you start to turn, I encourage you to take it. I'm sure it'll be very entertaining for the rest of us.
Perhaps while being involved in a romantic relationship, he improves and begins to value you slowly, but at the start this is not the case. He is very scary, especially when he sneaks in to bite you at night. In general, vampire bites can be seen as a metaphor for sexual assault, like it was shown in earlier novels. Vampire bites are painful, happen without your consent, can kill you or even turn you into a corrupt undead creature. With Astarion, things are even worse. He sneaks in at night and after a failed attempt to bite starts blaming and manipulating you, trying to make you feel guilty to get what he wants. In the game, we know what outcome awaits in this case, but if it were a real situation, as Spawn fans love to bring as Lord fans down to earth, we wouldn't think it's cute and that we should feed the hungry kitty. We would avoid such a dangerous guy who wants to assault sorry, bite you because he's really unsafe. But I want to assure you that there is nothing wrong with liking a character because he makes you feel desired. Of course, toxic masculinity and misogyny are very serious problems, and there are real reasons why some fantasies are better left as such. But we're all humans and all of us have ambiguous desires, so there is no need to shame each other because of the choice in a video game. Astarion's personality was rewritten many times, and even his elven race and rogue class now take backseat to the main reason of his behavior, which is a deep psychological trauma. This narrative change not only distracts our attention from Astarion's negative traits, but also provides new motivation to follow a good path with him rather than ascending him. Now some fans without hesitation say he's actually good at heart, he never wanted to be evil, he doesn't understand what he needs, he is too traumatized to make decisions for himself. And it's all because Astarion's negative personality traits were either downplayed to make interactions with him more pleasant and entertaining, or are now simply being overlooked by fans. His charm and humorous behavior are now being perceived as a coping mechanism which helps him deal with a traumatic experience. Let's take a closer look at his trauma. I decided to focus on this topic because it's a crucial part of Astarion's story. It's extensive and brilliantly written, prompting us to deeply analyze his behavior. A significant part of the plot revolves around this aspect of Astarion's personality. Spawn Astarion fans believe that Lord Astarion doesn't heal from his trauma, it only worsens, while Spawn Astarion copes better and becomes happier. Let's see if this is true. Indeed, some aspects of his personality can be openly interpreted as ways to deal with trauma and dissociate from unpleasant situations happening throughout the game. For example, Astarion theatrical behavior and sarcasm can be seen as a coping mechanism, as well as lack of guilt for his actions.
Yes, now that you mention it, I may have done that. Don't look at me like that. Cazador's orders. Quite the deviation from my usual routine, of course. Capture, not lure. I didn't bring them in with sweet rolls or anything. I really forgot about them. Felt nothing the moment I handed them over to him.
He interacts with others according to a learned scenario. During the confession scene, he admits he seduced Taff for getting them on his side.
Seduce you, sleep with you, manipulate your feelings so you'd never turn on me. It was easy. Instinctive. Habits from 200 years of charming people kicked in.
He learned to follow orders to avoid future punishment for disobedience. For example, when we insist on Astarion biting the blood merchant, he obeys and again copes with his playful manners.
Fine, I'll do it. Darling, I've had a sudden change of heart. After all, who could resist such a delectable neck?
Or when we insist on sleeping with him during his confession scene, he doesn't say no.
I suppose it has felt different with you. I suppose if this is what you want, then I shall provide.
He doesn't think about problems by default and doesn't reflect on why he behaves a certain way without external influence from Taff, as he admits if we protect him from the blood merchant.
It should have been so easy to let the drow use me for her fantasy, but perhaps, you showed me I have enough strength. I don't need to.
During his time under Cazador's control, Astarion experienced all forms of abuse from his master. Firstly, it was physical abuse. Astarion mentions repeated tortures, and when we become closer to him, reveals the biggest sign of his humiliation, a huge scar on his back, part of the infernal contract.
Cazador worked on it from dusk until dawn, all with an ancient blade he called his needle. Cutting and tearing, starting over if I screamed or winced too much. It was a rough night.
Secondly, he suffered from emotional abuse. Cazador was verbally humiliating him. He calls Astarion worthless, even when we meet Cazador face to face.
Oh, you are weak, my child. You are a small, pathetic little boy who never amounted to anything.
Plus, Cazador engages in victim blaming.
You are going to suffer for everything you did to me!
I have known you for 2 centuries. Have I not suffered enough?
Astarion once even tells us about ritualistic abuse when he was punished regardless of his actions.
He had me go out into Baldur's Gate to fetch him the most beautiful souls I could find. It was a fun little ritual of his. I'd bring them back, and he'd ask if I wanted to dine with him. And if I said yes, he'd serve me a dead, putrid rat. Of course, if I said no, he'd have me flayed. Hard to say which was worse.
Thirdly, it was neglect, as Cazador didn't take care of his spawn. He didn't provide them with new clothes, they lived in terrible conditions and were poorly fed. This is evident from the description of Astarion's initial clothing and his stories about eating rats and bugs.
Anyway, the bear will sustain me, and it's a marked improvement over the rats and flies Cazador would feed me.
And the most emphasized aspect of Astarion's trauma in the game is sexual abuse. Astarion was seducing victims for Cazador, delivering them when they were most vulnerable. He entertained them in a specific room in the palace while waiting for Cazador to take them.
This is where I took our guests. I'd entertained them here until Cazador appeared and took them away.
In general, Astarion says the following things about this aspect of the trauma.
I spent 200 years using my body to lure pretty things back for my master. What I wanted, how I felt about what I was doing, it never mattered. I have bedded thousands of people. Half of them I barely remember. Most of them didn't even grant me temporary bliss. I tried to pick beautiful people where I could, but there were so many over the years. After a while, you stop caring. All the promiscuous jibes paint a picture of someone who had relished the deed. Enjoyment. That didn't come into it. I never had a choice. Being close to someone, any kind of intimacy, was something I performed to lure people back for him. Being with someone still feels tainted. Still brings up those feelings of disgust and loathing.
Based on these remarks, some people interpret Astarion as asexual or are convinced that he doesn't like sex or cannot enjoy it. I think this assumption is fundamentally wrong because, first of all, Astarion is a hedonist who is a fan of decadence and debauchery. He just loves indulging in all sorts of pleasures. In the first act, he seduces us not only for his nice simple plan, but also in order to indulge in some hedonism at the goblin or the tiefling party. Devnotes in the script of his dialogue at the tiefling party say that he is being nasty because this party is not hedonistic enough for him. However, he still hopes to enjoy the evening with the main character.
I'm just looking for a little more excitement, a little more fun. By the hells, sex, my dear, a night of passion.
And when we're having the goblin party, they say he can finally indulge in his hedonistic side.
And I wish I was drinking out of the skulls of everyone who's ever wronged me. Life is tough. Although that's not to say we can't have a little fun. Delicious. So, what happens next?
Secondly, the game has many lines indicating that he actually enjoys it and wants to enjoy it voluntarily. When we become closer to him, he realizes sleeping with us was more than just lust or manipulation because he starts feeling something for us. Even though sex has become a routine process, Astarion admits he enjoyed the nights with the main character.
That time was special to me. I've gotten on my back 10,000 times or more and forgotten half of them. But you, I'll remember.
During his confession scene, we can ask if our knights meant something for him.
Of course they did. That's the problem. Or part of it.
When we tell him we don't have to sleep together, he says it sounds like a challenge.
Why, that almost sounds like a challenge.
Plus, Astarion says the main character is attractive to him.
Of course I am. Look at you. You're a vision. And you're so much more than that.
He even says sleeping together was the most satisfying thing when you arrive at Cazador's palace.
Then again, this is hardly the strangest thing we've done together. Although it could be the most satisfying. Well, the second most satisfying.
Additionally, after completing his personal quest, he enjoys intimacy with the main character in both routes.
If a night of passion is on offer, I could be persuaded. Shall we have one last night together before you join me in immortality? One for the road, so to speak.
Moreover, there are signs that Astarion wants to indulge in hedonism and experiment not only with the main character but also with other people.
That would certainly spice up this evening. All right, but don't take too long. You're not the only tasty morsel around here.
The most interesting interactions concerning this matter I found between Astarion and Lae'zel, which was a surprise for me.
Would you believe I've never been with a Githyanki?
If you cease your frivolous ways, keep your mouth closed, and learn to obey, perhaps we can attempt it.
Oh, no. I think I will leave that honor to our esteemed friend.
Feed if you must, Astarion, but give me so much as a hungry look, and I'll drive a stake through your heart.
I do so very like spicy food.
If we refuse sleeping with Lae'zel at the party, she says she'll spend time with Astarion instead, and the morning after comments on it rather positively.
Oh, but do enjoy yourself this night. I intend to myself. Astarion looks particularly tempting. So I did, and he served his use. Most enthusiastically, I might add. I may even avail myself of his talents again, should he keep his fangs off my flesh.
People tend to say that he agrees to sleep with her at the party because he is just super afraid. However, it turns out this is really not the case. Astarion is very interested in tasting her because, first of all, she's a good killer. He admires her bloodlust. And second of all, she and her culture is something novel and fresh to him since he has never been with the Githyanki before.
But the Gith? What in the hells would she taste like?
At last, we wash our weapons in absolute blood.
I like this bloodlust look on you. Whew. Very flattering.
Even now, at the cusp, you waste your breath on prattle.
Another confirmation of the fact that Astarion tries to have fun we can see during this amusing dialogue between him and Alfira in camp if you play as Dark Urge.
I do hope you'll be comfortable in our little camp.
Thank you. It's just a relief to be somewhere safe.
Would you like a tour? We can start with my tent, if you like.
Your tent? Oh, I'm quite all right, but thanks ever so much.
Very well. There's no accounting for taste.
And he willingly experiments at the Sheriff's Caress with the Drow twins after defeating Cazador.
I'd like to try doing things like this again. Now I'm free to find my own desires. And don't worry, I'll dart out if I don't enjoy it faster than I used to run from the sun. What a world. I never dreamed I'd be on the paying end in a brothel. But our leader here has made the dire mistake of failing to sleep with me so far, and it's a mistake I have been aching to correct.
Considering the fact that Astarion is a hedonist striving for short-term pleasures which don't bring long-lasting moral satisfaction, it could have simply become a monotonous thing for him after 200 years. Plus, he doesn't know love and consent in this matter because he was using seduction and intimacy as tools for social influence. He was going through it over and over again, even with those who repulsed him. He subconsciously learned how to dissociate from his body during the process, and we can see it if we go with him to the Sheres's caress, and it makes it seem that he doesn't enjoy it.
But when you meet his eye for a moment, there's a look about him that reveals he's a million realms away. But as you sit on his lap, resting afterwards, you look into his eyes and see no trace of joy, just an intensity that makes you shiver.
When mentioning this aspect of the trauma, he specifically emphasizes the fact that he didn't have control over his body, especially when it came to sex.
I had nothing at all for so long. Not even my body. That was owned by Cazador. To be sent out to tempt fools into his palace.
This is evident during all the intimate scenes with him. He leads staff and is always on top of them, wanting to enjoy the process, having full control over the situation, rather than retreating into his mind. When Astarion meets the main character, he gradually falls in love and starts perceiving intimacy differently. After noticing that the blood merchant from the Moonrise Towers doesn't see him as a person, but as someone who is willing to fulfill her fantasies, he becomes aware of his problem, including the emotional aspect of sex. Realization that sex combined with genuine feelings and mutual consent is something entirely different scares him, which is why he takes a break from intimacy to reflect on it.
It's not because, you know, we haven't in a while. Sorry, Pet. I'm not quite comfortable with doing this again yet. Enjoy yourself, of course. But I dearly hope you aren't only having sex because we haven't in a while.
From all this information, I conclude that Astarion doesn't dislike sex as such. On the contrary, he loves it and he wants to enjoy it, especially with someone who he can trust and who he has built a close relationship with. However, since it's associated with unpleasant experiences and has become a routine process of seducing victims, Astarion needs time to overcome his dissociative disorder. Slave victims of sex industry often face the same problems. Talking about Astarion being used, we come to the most often argument of Spawn fans why we shouldn't ascend Astarion. They are convinced that after ascension, Astarion doesn't heal from his trauma. Where did this assertion come from? Narrative designer Baudelaire Welch claimed that we ascend Astarion because we want him for our kings, that we ignore his problem and don't give him a chance to deal with his trauma, that we help him only because we want to use him for sex. This statement is very strange because, first of all, the theme of sex is not tracked during the ritual. The character asks the player for help and nothing more. Neither the narrator nor Astarion himself suggests that you get something in return. The only way to persuade Astarion is to roll 2 dice. Secondly, we can refuse sex. Even after the ritual in the subsequent scene, the main character can refuse sex and only agree to the transformation into a vampire spawn. The romance continues and we don't break up with ascended Astarion. Thirdly, you also get sex after asking Astarion not to ascend. Even if you keep Astarion as a spawn, you still get a sex scene. It's just less explicit and is in a different location. And lastly, some players don't even romance Astarion and choose to ascend him because they are having an evil run or because they just want to make him a powerful ally. So, what's the point of all of this? I can see some slight inconsistency in Astarion's storyline. Welch admitted they wrote Astarion's confession dialogue where sexual trauma is first mentioned and where we might feel ashamed for objectifying him. It's very interesting because in various works or novels from the past, vampires were shown as over-sexualized, and Astarion is the first vampire who has some kind of trauma behind all of that. References to this aspect of his trauma don't appear until the end of the second act, which was in development when Welch joined Larian. From this I can assume that Astarion was slightly rewritten as Welch tried to explore their interests in this work, which caused such plot holes. I've already shown you the part of Astarion writer's interview where he said he wanted to represent a balance of evil and fun in Astarion, but trauma doesn't go along well with evil and fun, so we get what we get. Rooney has never said that Astarion behaves a certain way just because he copes with his trauma, and I assume that only Lord Astarion fits that original idea of dark and fun. However, I have nothing against Astarion's sexual trauma because it makes his character deeper and more interesting. This trauma humanizes him and makes us sympathize. On the other hand, it feels like an attempt to reshape and rewrite the character who initially was negative and corrupt. Astarion, who starts as a cold-blooded killer, disrespecting our personal boundaries and threatening us with a knife at our first meeting, gradually reveals a sentimental, vulnerable, and sensitive side. We, as players, sympathize with him, trying to understand his behavior, and by the time of the ritual, his depraved tendencies seem to fade away. Analyzing Astarion's personality and his trauma in depth is undoubtedly valuable. However, it's essential to remember that he is not a real human. He is the product of his writer's fantasies with the hint of recent tendencies in narrative design. And it's crucial to balance his psychological analysis with the fact that he is a video game character with openly evil traits. When we watch the scene, which I infinitely love, where he, with puppy dog eyes, tells us about the hardships of his life and confesses his love to us, we immediately give him the benefit of the doubt, forgive him all his sins, and stop noticing them because of his pretty, suffering face. Without these changes, we would still continue to see Astarion as evil, annoying manipulator who wants to take over the world. And Ascension transforms him back into his original self, shocking everyone with his evil nature, although he was evil from the start, since the moment he pulled his knife on you in the beginning of the game. Taking into account Astarion's detailed trauma, we can now closely examine what happens to the Lord and the Spawn after defeating Cazador. I have already discussed the sexual aspect of Astarion's trauma and came to the conclusion that it was added at the late stage of game development and made his character quite inconsistent. So I don't think it's crucial to take this seriously when we decide should we ascend Astarion or not. Although people might assume that depending on the choice you make, Astarion becomes separated into two different personalities. However, I'm convinced that it's fundamentally wrong because Astarion stays pretty much the same in both cases, just conditions of his life change depending on the route you choose. Speaking of other aspects, Astarion approvals actually stay the same for the Lord and the Spawn, and they look so random that it seems Astarion has become even more chaotic by the end of the game. One person on Reddit analyzed his approvals throughout the game, and the results are pretty much obvious. Astarion mostly approves of evil or chaotic choices and almost always disapproves of the good ones. Speaking of the overall change in his behavior towards the end of the game, it turns out he becomes even less good and more chaotic. I think developers were just lazy to change approvals for both of them, but if you look at it from the other side, it's actually a perfect depiction of the fact that he stays the same person regardless of the choice. And even though he cares about Yenna, he still likes killing and still wants to enjoy his hedonism and debauchery. When he stays the Spawn, he still kills people, but at the same time he tries to find his own place in this world and makes his skills of an excellent killer work for that purpose. Or he inspires terror in people and even brutally punishes the other Spawn as their leader while taking responsibility for their well-being. When he becomes the Lord, he just doesn't have to hide his true nature anymore since nothing can stop him. He is super mighty and powerful, and the things he says sound even more hedonistic and arrogant, but he still takes care of the Taff and wants to make his city better. Astarion's actor Neil Newbon, during one of his live streams commented on playing all the sides of Astarion's character and admitted that in the case of Ascension, Astarion stays the same. He just stops pretending and gets rid of the theatrical mask.
I do love the fact that I got to create kind of two characters in one. But one of the fun things that I got to do with the directors and the writer as well, with Stephen, is Stephen and also the other writers that contributed towards Astarion wrote this Ascended storyline. And so when I came across it, I realized that, that his voice probably changes as well, because his whole status changes and his whole situation changes and his power changes. So I've got to do something else, because that'll be also an easy way for me to switch between one and the other. You know, I've always talked about Astarion being very theatrical. So what if Astarion's unascended spawn is theatrical and ascended Astarion is operatic, and use that as a sort of launch pad? So that one is theatre, one is opera. So the two are the same kind of things.
He also holds himself differently.
Yes, he does. He definitely holds himself differently.
He's like way more upright. His chest is a little more out.
Yeah, that's like status. That's like Laban work. So we're just using completely different status shift change as well. So whereas he has a lot of flow and all this kind of stuff, and it's theatrical and distracting. To always look at over here and don't see how I really feel with Spawn Astarion. With Lord Astarion, the facade, the cover is now off completely, so that you see him at his most terrible. And is completely honest, and he doesn't have to pretend anymore. So he loses a lot of the flamboyance and the fun of the theatricality, which is all a distraction anyway. That's all distraction, so you don't see how his hurt and damage and vulnerability. So Lord Astarion doesn't need that anymore. So we just thought, okay, now it's off. He doesn't need to pretend, he doesn't need to do too much, it's all about status and that kind of stuff.
Same goes for his trauma. Neither Lord nor Spawn overcome it, they just develop different mechanisms to deal with it. When Astarion remains the Spawn, this is considered to be a good happy ending. However, if we look at it from the other perspective, in this case Astarion has much more hardships than the Lord. The morning after defeating Cazador, he gets stuck with the same thoughts and starts dealing with that experience using affirmations like, yes, I can't walk under the sun anymore, but maybe it's all for the best. Everything will be fine. He tries to convince himself that he made the right choice.
I am, well, not happy with how things turned out. But this does feel right.
And he says similar things about Dame Aelin, like she got her revenge but isn't satisfied. He believes that later she'll probably feel better about it, but he himself gets stuck and thinks about it.
I expected Nightsong to be overjoyed after killing her fair-haired fool. Instead, she just seemed tired. Not what I expected. There was a sense of emptiness. Maybe it's just hard to see someone else suffer the same thing. It feels unfair. Like justice denied. Still, it's done. That's what matters.
Moreover, there is self-doubt. When he's pressured or devalued, he doesn't react negatively to toxic dialogue options. For example, it happens in the graveyard scene, which is a very important moment for him to open up.
The enthusiasm is appreciated, but hopefully not. I feel safe with you. Seen. And whatever the future holds for me, I don't want to lose that. If it has, it might be for the best.
And when he's forced to consume the astral touch tadpole, he bitterly says he's still a pathetic spawn. Of course, the Lord also agrees to the tadpole, but Spawn Astarion emphasizes his pathetic status.
I'm still nothing, aren't I? Just an expendable frail spawn who will burn to a crisp soon enough.
If we deny helping him with the ritual 2 times, he wishes the main character to die in agony, to the person he loved and cherished.
It's over. done with this. And I'm done with you. I would say good luck out there, but honestly, I hope you die screaming.
In this case, he just leaves the party. However, if you start the ritual but change your mind in the process, Astarion becomes so furious that he decides to attack and even kill you. Of course, he feels like he's betrayed. Taff was the first person in decades who was ever kind to him and decided to help. By the time of the ritual, Astarion trusts them and believes they would make that huge sacrifice for him.
Don't you tell me what I needed!
No question why he gets angry when Taff agrees at first but suddenly changes their mind, not willing to pay that price anymore. And here his immorality is getting exposed as he impulsively decides that his love deserves to die for such betrayal. And this is the perfect example why his temper cannot be changed so easily if Taff only makes good and right choices in the game.
And if I can't escape, then no one can. Not them. And certainly not you!
Fans actively justify him here, saying that he's just having a mental breakdown. However, to me it seems that he's just showing his true negative nature. His trauma and negative behavior patterns don't go away because of a dice roll. He remains a very complex character, and if you break up with him after defeating the brain, he also starts showing his real self.
Is this what you want? I would understand if you wanted to go your own way. You... What? I didn't think you'd actually agree. How dare you? After all I've done for you, after everything I've sacrificed. But fine. If that's what you want, so be it. There are thousands of vampires spawn in the Underdark, just waiting for a leader. I'll find them. I wish you well out there. Just don't come knocking on my door. I'll have a lot of hungry mouths to feed.
Moreover, in this situation, he manipulates you again, trying to make you feel guilty, just like he does in the beginning of the game. And if he dares say such nasty things to the person he loves, what stops him from doing the same thing, even without the breakup? And to me, it seems he doesn't perceive refusing the ritual as something positive for his personal development, but a sacrifice so the main character doesn't leave him. There is also an option to kill Cazador without Astarion and tell him the news afterwards. Hearing that, he is shattered and rightfully outraged that the main character didn't give him a chance to choose for himself and doomed him to eternity in the shadows.
I'm not free. I'm trapped. I'll never be anything but a spawn now. You've sentenced me to an eternity in darkness. I could have had that much power. I could have walked in the sun. And now you have the gall to stand there and announce that you've doomed me to this life forever. Whatever your fears, this is my life. It should have been my choice. And you should have trusted me to make it.
I think it says a lot about what happens to the spawn Astarion. He wanted to ascend, but we didn't agree to that. And because he loves us, he just follows our word. I don't know if it's worth it, it's another philosophical question, but to me it looks very tragic. Overall, his behavior is shown very realistically, and we can conclude that spawn Astarion shows signs of complex PTSD. Complex PTSD develops in individuals who experienced prolonged or repeated traumatic events. Since complex PTSD appears after systematic humiliation and violence, altering with periods of rest that give false hope that everything will change, it leads to a dreadful complex from self-deprecation to derealization. One of the prominent symptoms is self-blame and submission, as well as a sense of helplessness or loss of the ability to dominate. Astarion also shows paradoxical gratitude and even love towards Tav, the person who literally shattered his dreams and wishes. Is there a chance for Spawn Astarion to heal from his trauma? Undoubtedly yes, especially if the main character stays with him and helps him with that. However, it may take a longer time because some basic needs are unmet in Spawn Astarion's case. For example, Spawn Astarion remains in a vulnerable position because now he has to deal with monster hunters and he cannot walk in the sun. What if he accidentally appears under the sun with no help from others? Plus, he still suffers from that wild vampiric thirst for blood, which can be stronger than any other emotion. After Ascension, he mentions that he didn't feel many things for a very long time.
I felt so very little. For so long. My edges dulled over the numb years rotting in the boudoir and kennels. Now, I can hear it at last. See it at last.
Or when the dark urge fails to refuse Baal's will and gets doomed to the eternity of madness, Astarion also remembers times when he was barely sane.
I've had periods where I was so hungry, I was all but robbed of speech and reason. If you become, as I fear, feral, scrabbling, all but a carrion creature, I don't think I'll be able to look at you. It'll remind me too much of my worst self.
Does this mean if he doesn't ascend, all his feelings remain dulled? Very good question. Nevertheless, some positive changes are shown in the game. He sincerely confesses his feelings to the main character and is determined to overcome any difficulties in future. He willingly experiments in sex, as I've said in the previous chapter, and even learns to protect himself after being betrayed by the main character who slept with Mizora.
So, seems you were having fun? I don't want to lose you either, but I really thought there was more to you. And you were better than other people. More fool me, I suppose. Perhaps not. But now I'm wondering if any of this meant anything. I thought I could trust you, which was no small thing. I'm not sure what to think. You can promise me the heavens. It doesn't change the choice you've already made. It was selfish. It was you not thinking about anyone but yourself, and that's a feeling I know all too well. I may not have the moral high ground when it comes to betraying trust, but right now, I see everything I've been trying to escape. In you. Even I deserve better than this. We're done.
I'm sure with the main character's support he can handle the trauma. Moreover, he can even do it himself, as we can see if we don't romance him. The ending where he becomes the leader of the Spawn in the Underdark is my favorite. Of course, there might be problems, since the Spawn are the people who he himself doomed to vampiric life in the shadows. How does he feel looking at them every day? Or will they even listen to him, since they might hate him for what he has done to them? Plus, it seems he still hasn't let the hatred hatred towards Cazador go because he tells how he burned his palace. However, now he has purpose in his life. He became a leader as he has always dreamed, and he even admits he uses some violent punishments in order to keep people under control.
Oh no, people can be quite meek after seeing you murder their former master. And if they do step out of line, it just takes one or two brutal examples to remind everyone else of their place. I'm not a tyrant. I do care for their well-being. I just can't afford to show weakness.
Now let's talk about what happens to the Lord Astarion after Ascension. Immediately after the ritual, Ascended Astarion starts reacting very sharply to toxic remarks, finding it difficult to control his emotions. He angers if you say you miss the guy he was before, comparing him to Cazador, his tormentor, who made him his spawn and put him in a metaphorical cage for 200 years. Astarion's cage was more serious than actual torture and submission. The state he's in, the shadows, and the hunger he has to endure are a constant reminder of what his tormentor has done to him. Meeting Astarion's siblings in camp at night, we can find out more information about his struggles. If we keep silent, Leon reminds Astarion of his hateful past.
Enough! Enough talk and enough lies.
You were always weak, brother. We don't follow weak.
It is highlighted in the script of the game. The tag Vampires Called Astarion Weak appears, and we get an extra dialogue option after the fight with his brethren. I think this links to one of the main topics of Astarion's story, his will to fight for power and freedom. Then we can ask Astarion about his weakness, and he reveals the most horrible torture he has ever experienced, a year of solitude, darkness, and hunger.
You don't know what it was like. There was no way out. Once, in the first decade of my slavery, I found a darling boy who I couldn't bear to bring back to him, so I ran. Instead of hurting that sweet man. After Cazador caught me, the bastard sealed me, starving, inside a dusty tomb, all on my own for an entire year. A year of silence. Months of scratching my hands raw, trying to carve my way out. More months of not moving at all. Months wishing only for death. So don't you ever judge me for doing what Cazador ordered.
At some point, it may even seem that Astarion really gave up, but luckily he was abducted by Mind Flayer, same as our main character, and got his chance to fight for his freedom again.
I am still here. And I will fight him until I fight my last. And while repaying what he did to me is impossible, I am damn well going to steal that bastard's life work. I will become the Ascendant.
During the game, he wants to become something more than just a spawn or something new. And the ascended vampire he can become by performing the ritual is a new state of freedom he aspires to. He probably believes that by being reborn as a new living vampire, he will finally be able to break those chains and to become free from that metaphorical cage. However, it also takes time. After gaining power, he takes full control of the situation and his partner. He shows hyperinflated arrogance and self-importance, like there's him and his consort. Everyone else is just dust under their feet. Whether someone dies or not depends on his personal goals. Astarion has huge trust issues and he doesn't want to be controlled again, which is a completely normal behavior for a former slave. He wants to solve this problem quickly and in a radical way with the help of that new power. Ascended Astarion is afraid of being in the same vulnerable position again, and, the most importantly, he is very afraid of losing Taff. This is why after Ascension he doesn't let us stay with him not becoming his spawn.
It seems I misjudged you. I thought we might have a future together, even an eternity. But perhaps you're not worthy. So, what's it to be, darling? Is this it? A pity, then. We could have had something truly special. I won't forget what you've done for me. I won't leave you to fight this alone. You came so far, only to slip now. Such a pity.
Moreover, speaking of the sexual trauma, Lord Astarion also tries to enjoy sex again in the brothel, but unlike Spawn Astarion, who experiences derealization, Ascended Astarion feels tension during the process. He also gives an unhealthy advice on how to deal with emptiness after casual sex with Mizora. He offers Taff an escapism option and tells to go talk to the druid because he knows he can't handle the situation healthily himself.
It happens, my dear. Best not to dwell on it. Not if you can move on to the next conquest. If you want healthy advice, go talk to a druid. I'm just telling you what works. Well, works. Might be putting it a little strong, but it makes it feel less terrible at least.
Apparently, in the case of Ascension, he simply goes into denial of his problems and his trauma. In this case, some signs of typical PTSD are traced in his behavior. Ascended Astarion avoids topics which trigger him, such as mentioning Cazador, for example.
Never again. I will not think about him. I don't even want to say his name.
Plus, he suffers from hyperarousal. He is easily startled and cannot control the outbursts of anger.
And you rejected me. Not just you, your whole body. That's all you have to say? After everything I've done for you?
Of course, on the other hand, perhaps it happens just because all his feelings became sharper and he's just learning how to digest them right after Ascension. Overall, Ascended Astarion has better conditions for recovery from trauma than Spawn Astarion because all the basic needs are met. He is safe and powerful, and even some movements towards healing are noticeable in the epilogue, where he behaves much calmer, as if he has digested the feelings that overwhelmed him after Ascension. He doesn't even react negatively when we compare him to Cazador anymore. Plus, he warmly remembers and misses the time we spent together despite his negative attitude towards that weak state he was in.
I did miss you, you know. There is a sense of loneliness that comes with power. We did share a wonderful adventure, you and I. A pity to see it end in some ways. But we have great new lives stretching out before us, and great new adventures to go on. I will never forget the time we spent together, though. And I know you'll never forget me.
Looking at Astarion's psychological state and how he behaves in the both branches of his storyline, we can see that his trauma is a complex set of personality changes that cannot be resolved with a snap of fingers, or rather with a dice roll during the last decision of his personal quest. The common statement that Spawn Astarion heals from the trauma while Ascended Astarion doesn't is incorrect and is not confirmed in the game. Both remain traumatized, and therefore this argument is not a negative factor for performing the ritual. Which of them will overcome their demons earlier and more effectively is only speculation. Nonetheless, considering the positive changes we can observe in the epilogue, where Spawn Astarion becomes vanilla kind in romance or tries himself as a leader in the Underdark, while the Lord comes down and expresses our significance to him, we can confidently say that both the Lord and the Spawn Astarion can exist happily with their partner and eventually overcome the trauma. However, this is not the only reason why some fans are convinced that Ascension is not the best choice for Astarion. So let's discuss other arguments against Ascension. We have discussed Astarion's trauma and how it affects him throughout the game. Also, we found out that the decision whether to ascend him or not doesn't make his psychological state better momentarily, and his trauma is so deep that it requires more than just a dice roll. So now I think we can finally discuss other aspects of Ascended Astarion's personality in detail. Is Ascension a bad ending for Astarion? No, a bad ending is when there is a complete failure, when the hero's journey, according to Campbell, isn't completed, when the main character dies or fails their trial. It's more accurate to call Ascended Astarion's ending evil. People started calling it bad because that's how Baudelaire Welch commented on it, which was very unprofessional for a narrative designer. Plus, Ascended Astarion's ending is evil from the D&D morality point of view. In D&D, an evil deed is something that harms others in order to gain power or wealth for oneself only. Other writers left us some freedom where we ourselves could decide what is good and evil and think about it more deeply because, for example, triumph and happiness or freedom are not always linked to something good and pure. Does Astarion lose his soul after Ascension, becoming a debtor to Mephistopheles? Very often people say that upon Ascension, Astarion loses his soul and becomes a debtor to Mephistopheles. If we look at the D&D lore, we can find out that there is no clear information about vampire souls. Speaking about other cases in general, vampires, same as other undead monsters in D&D, might not have a soul at all, or if they do, it is so corrupt by vampirism that no devil would ask for such a soul in exchange for their services. Larian gave up on this aspect, and vampires in BG3 gained a soul, which is as valuable as the soul of a living creature. Although when Astarion stays the spawn, Karlach comments on it saying that he kept his soul.
He could have had it all, but he kept his soul instead.
However, judging by Raphael's words, this is not the case at all. The game has no evidence of the fact that Astarion loses his soul. I think in Karlach's case she says that metaphorically because he didn't turn to the so-called dark side of his personality completely, or whatever morality developers were trying to impose on us through this variation of his story. As for Mephistopheles, the contract clearly states souls in exchange for abilities, which is completely fulfilled during the ritual. Astarion himself says that Mephistopheles simply created a new monster and he owes the devil nothing more.
Mephistopheles has made a new monster, not bound a creature to his will. The rite was honored. The sacrifice is over.
Plus, the way you make a deal with the devil is very important. A person should willingly and formally sign the contract, which has strict rules, as we can see on Will's example. He signs the contract with his own blood. Did Cazador do the same with Mephistopheles? We cannot know because there are no such details. Will the deal work if someone else takes Cazador's place? Is it mentioned in the contract? We also don't know. I tend to think it's impossible because, as I said, in order for the deal to work, it should be signed with blood. And that's why Astarion comments on his relationship with Mephistopheles the way he does. He has stolen the right from his master, paid the price, and gained his power. But no connection to the devil was formed because he didn't sign the contract with his own hand and with his own blood. But since Astarion becomes the vampire lord, is he affected by dark desires? Dark desires are a disadvantage of vampires which manifest in obsessions or jealousy. That is a magical effect which corrupts a person's mind and soul. People say because of those dark desires, vampires cannot love or care for someone, that those pure feelings are definitely supposed to turn into something cursed. Ever since early access, people have been asking if only bloodthirst and sadism drive Astarion's behavior.
Yes, let's have some fun. Don't be a coward. We could take them. We could kill them all.
Or does he behave like that because he's a vampire spawn affected by dark desires?
Yes, and I thought you weren't any fun.
Let's look at the D&D lore, specifically at the D&D 5e Monster Manual, page 295. Dark desires are described in the general chapter about vampires, which also gives us some information on vampire spawn and true vampires. However, it doesn't exactly say if only true vampires or vampire spawn are affected by dark desires. Page 297 says that vampires are lawful evil creatures, and page 298 says that vampire spawn are neutral evil. This indicates that probably all vampires have such disadvantages, since all of them have evil alignment, and evil alignment is the consequence of dark desires. D&D 5e has less information about vampire spawn than D&D 3.5e. Since we analyzed the concept of vampirism, I think it's useful to explore the earlier versions as well. Let's look at the D&D 3.5e Libris Mortis, the Book of Undead. Pages 38 and 39 describe vampire spawn. So it says that vampire spawn is a canonically evil entity with egoistic tendencies who also is an excellent killer wishing to become a leader. And it's super hard to keep them on a good path. It requires a lot of effort from a player. You can try to fix a vampire, but their true nature will stay evil no matter what. Larian claim they have created the game based on D&D 5e rules. However, analyzing Astarion's storyline, we can see that his vampirism differs from D&D rules in many ways, and it means that Astarion was either hiding his dark traits throughout the journey, which he learned to do in 200 years because he had to interact with victims, be attractive, survive, etc., or the game as a whole puts that out of sight and doesn't apply such strict rules to vampires and to Astarion respectively. For example, let's look at Larian's own creation, Ascension Ritual. Raphael says that the ritual rids the vampire of the burdens of vampirism. The vampire completing the ritual becomes alive and with the perks of a living being.
And I feel alive.
If Astarion is no longer undead after that, then we cannot tell what happens to his dark desires, since they are not described in the game or in the Devnotes. So I tend to think that if the ritual lets Astarion become free of vampiric disadvantages, then the way he behaves is not caused by dark desires, but by his own character.
Oh, it feels delicious.
And what about the 7,000 spawn we have to sacrifice for the ritual? The theme of sacrifice is very poorly written in this work. It has no dramatic value and we don't sympathize with the victims because we know almost nothing about the 7,000 spawn. They are not shown to us in the game and we are introduced to only one of them, Sebastian, literally 5 minutes before the ritual.
Sebastian.
You remember me.
And even then we don't see Astarion having any attachments to him. He shows regret in the moment, but if we talk to him after the dialogue with the victim, he basically says it's better for the spawn to die because they have lost everything.
What's the point? They're as good as dead. I thought they were dead. If they are unleashed, they will cause incredible carnage. They will be ravenous. They must die. Better they serve a purpose. It should be. I don't want to be like them. They're pathetic. Horrible.
Astarion couldn't care less about the girl children as well. His brothers and sisters are not described well too. We can learn a lot of spooky information about them, how they kill people and do horrible things. Deliria kills a girl for a blood transfusion experiment. Petras plans to drink the blood of another girl, luring her to the party in the palace. In general, we never have the opportunity to sympathize with them throughout the game, except for the single line where Astarion says he feels sorry for them. However, in all other moments of the game, Astarion openly dislikes them.
Trust me, I'd rather slaughter someone else's family, but if that's what it takes. And it's not like their sweet innocence. They brought Cazador just as many victims as I did. You're not getting sentimental, are you?
Besides, the game doesn't show us people who treated Astarion badly. Among the 7,000 spawn who were suffering from hunger in captivity for all these years, not everyone is good and righteous. But since we cannot witness their bad deeds, we simply don't have an opportunity to think deeply about the morality of the decision to set them free. Some of the companions comment on it rather reasonably.
If you release those ravenous starvelings, the city's poorer quarters will be their feast hall.
And what of the living they feast on? Should they not prove as admirable as Astarion? They deserve a chance too.
To understand the full weight of the decision we make and the price of power, the sacrifice should have been more significant and valuable. Perhaps someone close, someone Astarion or the main character truly cares about. I don't consider killing the 7,000 hungry vampire spawn a compelling argument against Ascension because they are no one, we don't know them, we don't sympathize with them. This moment is super poorly written in the game. The next argument against Ascension is that Astarion ascends out of fear. This statement was made by Larian's lead writer Adam Smith for IGN. So with Astarion, his evil ending is actually him. Much of what he does is out of fear, and as a player you can say to him, you're right to be afraid, and that sends him to a really horrible place. Once again, I feel some confusion of ideas and beliefs in here. I have already discussed different aspects of Astarion's personality, from his vampirism to his trauma, and found out that his psychological problems don't go along well with the ideas of dark and fun which were put in him in the first act at least. Anyway, is fear the motivation for Ascension? I think yes, but it's not the only motivation. The main motivation for Astarion is to become someone who will never have to fear anything or anyone ever again. So fear does play the major role in here, or rather the desire to get rid of it once and for all. I think it's not a bad idea to get rid of fears through Ascension and live happily afterwards, especially knowing what kind of hardships await spawn Astarion. Overall, Ascended Astarion becomes very confident and fears nothing. He says how free he feels, how he'll rule the city. He has no doubt in what he has done and lives happily even 6 months after defeating the Netherbrain. And if we continue the romance with Ascended Astarion, does main character become his spawn? First of all, the Devnotes say that we become his spawn. This is just a fact, whether someone agrees or not. And it's not far from the truth. We indeed become the offspring of his blood because he gives it to us during the transformation into a vampire. However, it's very clear that we become Ascended Astarion spawn differently compared to what he himself experienced during the process. Let's see how Astarion describes the transformation into a vampire spawn.
I remember how it hurt when I turned into a vampire. My body writhed and warped while I was utterly helpless. The grip of death owned my heart as it beat its last. I had to punch a hole in the coffin and claw my way through 6 feet of dirt. Then when I finally broke the surface, retching up dirt and congealed blood, Cazador was waiting. From that day on, I was his.
Now let's see what happens when he shares the gift of immortality with us. The process is different, it's less painful, and we weren't buried. He even bites us 3 times, which may be a reference to the Dark Kiss or the vampire wedding according to Ravenloft.
You have given me everything. Thank you.
As he drinks more and more, you feel yourself fading from consciousness. When you wake again, you will be his forevermore.
Then, during the conversation the next morning, Astarion twice repeats he shared his blood with us and that we shouldn't be afraid of the sun.
You were drained dry, and at the height of your delirium, I granted you 1 drop of my own blood. Don't you worry. You have supped of my blood. It will be no trouble to extend a fragment of my protection to you.
We can confirm this when we get rid of the Mind Flayer tadpole. Our taff indeed doesn't burn in the sun. Plus, they can still see themselves in the mirror. Also, their eyes don't glow like other spawns under Kazdor's control. We can see how this control over his brethren stops working after their master's death. Their eyes stop glowing, and the game obviously shows us that detail. Plus, Astarion says we became a stronger being with new abilities and we need not fear anything. Whether he's lying or not is hard to say. Van Richten wrote that the Lord lies to his bride about her new status, telling her she's just a spawn. Astarion behaves differently. But look at him, he doesn't love you. I can't even count how many times I received such comments. Of course, Astarion's words of love may sound unconvincing when he talks about it after the ritual.
Who's to say I don't? I'm willing to share all of this with you. What's that? If not love. Oh, that was completely different. I'd never hurt you. I love you. That's what you've been waiting to hear, isn't it? That's what you want. You're the one that I want. The one that I love.
And it's no surprise, love in the full understanding of the word is alien to Astarion.
Love? I don't remember love.
That's why when he stops showing off after Ascension, he persuades us to become his spawn, telling us as he thinks what we want to hear, and it may sound insincere because he simply doesn't know how to express it. He's been alone for a very long time and didn't trust anyone. The fact that someone trusts him while he himself has huge problems with it is something novel to him. Maybe his trust issues will never go away. However, seeing Taff trust him, he appreciates them for giving him everything. And in return, he shares everything he can with them. Sharing is Ascended Astarion's language of love. He proves it with actions and generosity.
Ask me anything, and it will be yours. Yes, my treasure. We are sovereigns. My sole endeavor now is to make this world yours and mine alone.
Plus, judging from his confession in Act 2, he himself says that he starts feeling something for us. And if his feelings only intensify after Ascension, it means he starts feeling something stronger for us too. Is this love in the understanding of mortal beings? I think yes, why not? Another interesting dialogue which makes people confused about Lord Astarion's love to us happens if we reject him after Ascension, refuse his proposal. He sulks for 3 days and then tries to convince us that we did the right thing because, as he says,
I would have ruined your love, used your trust until you were nothing.
If you can read between the lines, this is just another manipulation, and it's clear that he deeply regrets the loss and takes a defensive position, blaming us and saying he's surprised we didn't follow our feelings. I think it's clear that in this case he's trying to show his disdain for the problem, that he's indifferent to it, or maybe he's even trying to convince himself that everything is fine. It's not a threat, but rather an attempt to climb above, because he's talking about a hypothetical situation since the main character has already refused to be with him. It's not exactly healthy, but remember, he ascended 3 days ago and is overwhelmed with feelings. And after all of this, he offers to be friends anyway.
I hope, if not partners, we may be partners in crime. Yet.
He still doesn't want to be without us. He's just very hurt and upset at the moment, but in the epilogue, after 6 months, he recalls the time spent together warmly and seems to hope that we'll return to him.
I did miss you, you know. There is a sense of loneliness that comes with power. We did share a wonderful adventure, you and I. A pity to see it end in some ways. But we have great new lives stretching out before us, and great new adventures to go on. I will never forget the time we spent together, though. And I know you'll never forget me.
But if we stay with him, he talks about sharing his ambitions with us, saying that we complete him. There are no signs that he treats us badly. He does react negatively to toxic remarks because he has respect for himself. Plus, the Lord is much more honest than the Spawn. If we accept his terms, share aspirations, then he'll be with us. He'll protect and delight us. But I think the main argument is that he doesn't need Tav for any external reasons. It is only his choice. He could end the relationship whenever he wants, but he doesn't. He asks if we want to become a vampire like 3 times after the ritual, and if we refuse, then he doesn't do anything bad to us. Okay, but even if he loves Tav, he will never perceive them as an equal. After killing Cazador, Spawn Astarion says that he sees us as a partner and equal to himself.
When I look at my future, anything and everything feels possible now. And I get to share it with you as a partner. And equal.
This moment in the game is contrasted with the following line from the narrator when we pass a wisdom check to understand what Ascended Astarion is thinking while telling us to kneel before him.
He will always see you as degrading yourself if you continue to be with him. But perhaps you wish to degrade yourself, and he knows it.
When something is described as degrading, it means that it makes someone feel ashamed, humiliated, or lose self-respect. Me and other fans have been thinking about it for quite a long time, and we came to the conclusion that this phrase doesn't have any double meanings. It is just another poorly written moment in the game. I'm not sure we are supposed to perceive it as humiliation, because if that's how developers are trying to punish us for an evil choice, then it simply isn't fair. For example, we have another companion for an evil romance, Minthara, who sometimes says even worse things than Astarion, but there is no sign of punishment for having an evil run romancing her. Or, if I understand correctly, women are allowed to be evil and conquer the world and men don't? Bravo, that's the best roleplay ever we're talking about right here, you guys. Overall, everyone can interpret it as they wish, but I tend to think that in this case Astarion still considers himself unworthy. He performed the ritual not only because he always wanted that wealth and power, but also that we stayed with him forever to protect us. He is really afraid of losing us, but because of these fears, he still feels insecure. He also knows that he's not the fairy tale prince and he won't let us go. He acts morally wrong and offers us a life full of decadence. And decadence is translated as moral decay, the decline in morals and values. And yet we're something bright for him, something that helped him achieve everything he now has. And we willingly agree to such an attitude towards ourselves when we make a conscious choice to become his spawn, when we agree to be with him forever and obey the request to kneel, acknowledging his power and supremacy in this relationship. Objectively speaking, does Ascended Astarion perceive Tav as an equal at all? More likely no than yes. Speaking about the game's lore, Astarion is a completely different creature, an ascended vampire. By becoming his consort, we can never have the same position, the same voice as he has. Does he show us that he stands above us? Sometimes it can be traced in his words when he says that he's watching us, for example.
Just don't stray too far. But you'd never dream of doing that, would you? Why would I need to? You're going to be wonderfully obedient.
However, he shares the power, wealth, and perks of the vampire ascendant with us, supports us in any decisions, shows respect, and doesn't forget to praise us and shower us with compliments, asking our opinion on what we're going to do. Many people like the dynamic of the proud leader in the couple and his consort fighting side by side. This happens for various reasons, from psychological to cultural. Some people even heal their traumas through such romantic stories or are simply interested in this kind of romance. And there is nothing wrong with that because people perceive everything differently and have a right to indulge in whatever narrative they like. Also, people say that Astarion becomes Cazador 2.0. I don't even like the fact that I have to discuss this, but if you played Ascended Astarion storyline, you know for sure that he doesn't become a direct copy of Cazador. First of all, we don't know much about Cazador. We don't know how he was treating other powerful people or his wife's consorts, if he had them at all. In the game, we can only witness his attitude towards his spawn, and his behavior towards them involved starvation, skinning, carving runes, dressing in rags, forcing them to trade their body, and punishing them for any mistake. He even employed a personal inquisitor for punishment when he didn't feel like doing it himself. Astarion obviously doesn't adopt such extreme measures towards his spawn consort. Instead, he exhibits a different approach. He doesn't strictly enforce Cazador's rules, but rather navigates his relationship based on mutual understanding, which contrasts with Cazador's authoritarian and oppressive methods. But didn't you notice he definitely continues the cycle of abuse? So the words of Spawn Astarion about the cycle of power and terror are the main argument as to why Ascended Astarion continues the cycle of abuse. Of course, Ascended Astarion explicitly says how he will conquer the world, how he will kill anyone in his way to power, because he's evil. But does he exhibit similar abuse towards his consort? D&D represents European Middle Ages, which is a cruel world where you wouldn't be able to survive and have a successful life, being kind and forgiving to everyone. Astarion, after Ascension, puts himself in a strong position as he always wanted. Spawn Astarion partially behaves the same way. He doesn't become good after the death of his master, as I've said before. He just learns to survive in that cruel world the way he can, without having that infinite power. Vampires are undead creatures which are evil in Faerun. They are enemies of Lathander and druids, and their followers despise such cursed beasts. Even Will says that Astarion should have been killed at the first meeting, so vampires cannot be kind to everyone because there are people who are willing to kill them just because of their convictions. The dice roll doesn't change Astarion's personality, he just stops pretending, and I should remind you that Astarion shows many signs of sadism during the game. He likes watching others die or bleed to death since he's a vampire. But when we become his consort, nothing of that sort is shown in the game, except for the patch 6 kissing animations, which are going to be discussed in the next chapter. So, judging by the cruelty, Ascended Astarion, same as Spawn Astarion, was always an abuser just because he's a vampire, but he exhibits it only in the social sphere. I've already said that he doesn't become the second Cazador because first of all, we don't know Cazador well, and second of all, we can clearly see that Astarion doesn't adopt those strict rules which Cazador had for his spawn. We as consort live a very good life compared to what Astarion experienced being a spawn. For example, after defeating the brain, he asks us what we want to do and agrees to any option we choose.
The world is ours for the taking. So, what would you like?
Or we can leave him and go to Avernus with Karlach, and then you'll have a very interesting dialogue at the epilogue party, which was added with patch 7, where he says he's not a controlling monster.
You didn't leave me. I let you go. If I'd have wanted you to stay, I only had to say the word, and you would have been back by my side. But I'm not some controlling monster. I wanted to give you space to see what else is out there. Make your own mistakes, and return to me, ready to fully appreciate our life together.
People forget that it's a role-playing game with plenty of options. You can play without pressuring him and there won't be any negativity. Out of 13 options in the conversation with him during the epilogue party, only a couple are showing our dissatisfaction with the relationship. So it means there is an option to have a happy, free and respectful relationship with Ascended Astarion, because this is a role-playing game after all. He listens to you, doesn't control you, or for example lets you have fun with Halsin. If you want to suffer and imagine how abusive he is, then it's your full right, but it doesn't mean your imagination is true. We're here to entertain ourselves and don't want to listen to sick fantasies of some individuals. Thoroughly analyzing behavior of Ascended Astarion, it becomes clear that he doesn't show any signs of violence towards his consort. He's nothing like Cazador. Other fan theories are just headcanon. I hope those who haven't played Ascended Astarion's storyline play it and evaluate for themselves how the things truly are. But still, he's not free. This is the most common statement of Spawn fans. They believe that upon ascension, Astarion doesn't get rid of the burdens of his trauma, of his fears, or the very cage of slavery that Cazador metaphorically trapped him in. I fundamentally disagree with this because objectively Astarion gains boundless strength, power, and authority. He's no longer afraid of anything, free to do as he pleases. Even in the scene where Taff willingly kneels before him, the developer's notes indicate that they both look at each other with love, and Astarion stands proudly before Taff. He is strong and he is free. Initially, most fans of Ascended Astarion were satisfied with his route the way it was released by Larian last August. Later, patch 5 brought a lot of new interesting content, adding an epilogue where we saw that the relationship between Vampire Lord and his consort is still very good 6 months after defeating the Brain. Astarion doesn't mistreat Taff, says he loves them and gives them any pleasures they desire. However, patch 6 was announced on February 14th, adding new content for Valentine's Day, and people found out that developers created 3 new disturbing kissing animations for Ascended Astarion.
How could I say no? You are my favorite, after all.
These kisses, at the least, were out of context for the entire narrative about Ascended Astarion. Some people liked them, others were disappointed or even outraged and upset to the point that they deleted the game from their devices. At the same time, some Spawn fans seriously claimed that we deserved such an attitude from our Vampire Lord for making a bad choice in the game, and Larian deliberately added them to teach us a lesson.
I do rather like that, you know.
Nevertheless, such a PR move has offended some fans' feelings and was considered as an inappropriate attitude towards the supporting audience. It even seemed that these kisses were inspired by numerous comments from haters of Ascended Astarion who said he scares them. For more than half a year, his actual fans were robbed of their roleplay and had no option except for terrified facial expressions during such an intimate and vulnerable moment as sharing a kiss with their beloved one. Moreover, the situation was more serious than just dissatisfaction with Larian's actions. One of the Discord server's Astarion cultists conducted a survey among fans of Ascended Astarion, asking them what they felt from the new kisses, and it turned out that these kisses triggered PTSD for 93% of respondents or their friends. These kisses added a new atmosphere of fear into the root of Ascended Astarion that wasn't there before, giving the impression that Astarion's character is being rewritten on the go. In the scene where we first kneel before him, we do it only if we want to. The narrator even emphasizes that we may like it when we try to pass the insight check at the moment. By agreeing to kneel, we confirm that we like it. Otherwise, we have a full right to refuse and leave. You can even see the Devnotes about this scene on the screen right now. Later in that scene, Taff can say, "Oh, come on, let it hurt," and Astarion grabs their neck, which happens during one of the new kisses as well. But on the contrary, during the transformation scene, Taff isn't afraid of it. They ask for it themselves. They can also ask Astarion to be gentle, and in this case, his attitude is very cute. He kisses Taff's hand and tries to be careful. He doesn't say no to that. If we find his attitude offensive, we can even kick Astarion in the balls. The scary and horrible Lord Astarion hilariously screams and retreats. He does nothing to Taff, but after patch 6, our Taff somehow lost the ability to stand up for themselves, or at least enjoy the moment. In case you're wondering, these are dev notes for the graveyard scene with Spawn Astarion. Luckily, Larian listened to the disappointed audience and changed Taff's facial expressions to neutral or even pleasant ones in patch 7, and now we can finally enjoy the romance with our vampire lord once again. Most of the fans were satisfied with the new emotions on the main character's face, however, these kisses have the same vibe. Some of us would want to have at least one gentle kiss, just like in the case of other companions, but I suppose we should use mods for that. So I've analyzed Astarion from many aspects, we've discussed his personality, his trauma, what happens to him after ascension and so on, and I hope I helped you understand his storyline better. As you can see, Ascended Astarion is not as scary as people describe him. He's just another video game character who exists for our roleplay and entertainment. His personality is very interesting, it helps us experience the relationship with the vampire lord. And there is no need to teach anyone how to play their game because people have a right to do whatever choice they like in their playthrough. As for the Spawn fans who haven't played Ascended Astarion's route, I remind you it's like 75% of the viewers of my channel. I hope you experience that storyline at least once. I'm sure you won't regret it. At least you will be able to evaluate it and have your own opinion about him. I've been making this video for 4 months now because I was waiting for patch 7. And you know, during this time I've had ups and downs. It was very hard to finish this huge analysis of Astarion. Of course, I wasn't able to mention everything that we know about Astarion in my video, but I think I'm going to put some links in the description so you can get more information about him if you want. New patch 7 is amazing. It gave us new evil endings which are breathtaking, especially the ending with the vampire lord Astarion in his origin playthrough where he becomes the sun lord or whatever. It's really great. It looks amazing. I hope you also enjoyed it as I did. Overall, I'm very thankful to Larian and to developers for creating such a great game. I've been playing this game for the past year. I have like 800 hours on Steam and I've never played so much in any other games like Baldur's Gate 3. And also, I'm very thankful that we got such an amazing character as Astarion who inspired so many people to create arts, fanfiction, videos on YouTube and so on. Astarion even made it possible for some people to cure their depressions, which is super impressive. As for me, I think my hyperfix is fading away slowly and I want to move on to play other games. You know, there are so many interesting games which are going to be out very soon. And now I want to thank some people who helped me in creation of this video. First of all, I want to thank Karina.B who provided very beautiful renders with Astarion for my chapter backgrounds. They are just amazing and very beautiful. If you want to get the same render, you can just text her in any of the social media that I'm going to link down below. She can create very beautiful renders for you. Next big thanks are for Nirraart. She was the only one who was supporting me in whatever I was doing during all these 4 months. She's been evaluating the earlier versions of my video and was always inspiring me to continue my work. She was such a great support for me. I'm super thankful. You can also visit her channel or her other social media because now she's making art commissions. Look what kind of art she has created with my OC character from Warhammer 40k. And the third important person who I want to thank is Alexandra Dell. She's been checking the information in my videos. She was providing those Devnotes for my videos, those screenshots with the script. She's not a very public person, but I'm sure you're going to see her comments below this video. She helped me a lot and I'm super grateful. So thanks for watching and I hope you enjoy your time of the day. If you're starting a new playthrough or you are on a new playthrough after patch 7. I also hope you enjoy it and spend a good time with your Astarion. See you later, probably. Bye. А теперь на русском. Всем привет, девочки и мальчики. Я бы хотела очень сильно поблагодарить своих самых любимых девочек, истинных паладинов Вознесения из моего чата в Телеграме, который называется «Секта имени Астариона». Алена, Шу, Аня и Эври, вы были просто прекрасной поддержкой для меня. Если бы не вы, если бы не ваши 1000 сообщений в чате каждый день, я бы никогда не смогла закончить это видео. Была проделана колоссальная работа, я потратила очень много часов на это видео, и вы его так ждали. Я надеюсь, вам оно понравится. Я вас очень люблю и очень сильно благодарю, опять же, за поддержку. Вы прекрасны.
Although I suppose there is a lot to do here. Power to consolidate, a palace to claim. It will take time. But first, you and I are going to find the most hedonistic establishment in this city. And we're going to have a night that will go down in legend. After everything, I think I've earned it.